Hey, peace. Uhuru, Amani Naguvu, to the family out there. Welcome back to We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. Feels good to be black. I was going to say back, but it feels good to be both, black and back, for sure. It's been a minute since we did the podcast and book club, and we actually are starting a new book today. So I'm excited about that. But I'm Ikemba Ojore of We Charge Colonialism, host of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. Here with my comrade in arms. Frank, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. This is Frank Malbad. Welcome this morning. Host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series on every Sunday, and I'm glad that we are here. And let's continue.
Indeed, man. It's been a minute. I was feeling a little rusty and anxious before we got started. Like, yo, it's been a while. So, I gotta get back into the groove of things. But I know Frank, you in rare form because every Sunday you getting it in. So that's good. But I'm happy to be back. A lot of things was going on. Was really busy and just like overwhelmed with some things, man. But the revolution, and dealing with colonialism, that will have you feeling a little overwhelmed sometimes. So it's important that we find a way to strike that balance to be able to do this work, and also be able to deal with the travails, or the trials and tribulations, I should say, of colonialism. But with that being said, this is We Charge Colonialism. We're an anti-colonial think tank fighting against the colonial media as well as colonialism in general. But this is our way to counterbalance the colonial narrative about African people in our struggles and in our successes and our failures. Right. This is something that we need to be able to narrate. We should be able to tell these stories. So it's important, and it's important for us to be able to put out data, put out information that is going to empower African people to liberate themselves. So doing the research and making sure that we put out this information from our perspective. No one should be able to tell our stories but us, because we have an agenda. Yes, we have an agenda when we're putting out these stories, and it is to liberate and empower African people. And so who else is going to have an agenda that puts us at the center, right? To make us the subjects of what it is that we're trying to do. So with that being said, looking forward to getting into this new book. The new book that we are, and I'll put the link in the chat, and I'll put it in there throughout this podcast. We're starting Africa and global politics in the 21st century, a Pan-African perspective, right? And this is by Olayiwola Abegunrin. So we'll get into that in the second half of our podcast. But we usually start off with our weekly roundup. Frank, you want to get into your story? And after
Sure.
we finish our weekly roundup, we'll be going into the book. And peace and shout out to Natasha. She couldn't join us this morning, but she's still with us, and definitely looking forward to having her back as well.
Yeah. So we're gonna look at how to call it Europe, or let's say the NATO nations. And again, I brought this article up because again, with how the African and the continent and the African nations are going about and not seeing the reality and not seeing what is about to come. And that's why I brought this article out. And instead of Africans leaders focusing on the right thing, focusing on how they can mobilize the African leaders to have their own summit, all right, to have their ECWA, to have their AU, they are not doing it. Even though we know AU is not an organization for the African people, and even ECWA is not an organization for the African people, even though seems to be controlled and owned and funded and based in Africa, but they are not African organization. But the purpose of these articles that I brought out is this, right? This is the NATO nations, right? Or these are the NATO's nations, and they just had their summit in Washington, D.C. this week on the 11th, July 11th. They just had their summit, and their summit was about empowering their military. Now, why can Washington, D.C. says we want to power the American military to prepare for World War II? Why can't Germany say it? Why can't UK say it? But why all these NATO nations want to collaborate? Why they can't go as individual nations? Because they will not win. And the only way they will win the war, right? World War II, the only way they will survive, or the only way they will go to some extent into the war, is to bring all these nations together and then to fund a one military. And this was the purpose of this NATO meeting they had this week in Washington, D.C. Now, unlike the African continent, unlike the African leaders, right? Their only focus is to come for all these summits, to come and beg for money, okay? To come and beg America, to come and beg the European for money. Meanwhile, the purpose of World War III is actually because of Africa, okay? And we want for African leaders to recognize, to notice this. The purpose for World War III that is already ongoing is because of Africa, all right? And all these nations, all these colonial imperialist nations are coming together to get up against Africa, all right? But they are not saying they want to get up against Africa, but they are saying they want to get up against China and Russia, because it is China and Russia who are empowering African nations. So in order to defeat Africa, you have to defeat China and Russia. And that is what exactly they were discussing in this article here. But again, our African leaders, most of them are so dumb, okay? They have mud in their brain. They are not reading and they're not listening. All they want is to chase the data and have more money in European banks that is saying is owned by either William Ruto or Nana Akufo-Addo, while they continue to put their own people into captivity. So let's read the article and see. So now, okay. It says here, NATO Secretary General conclude landmark 75th anniversary Washington summit. Now, it says in the morning, Allah leader met with leaders from Australia, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, and the European Union to address shared security challenges and further deepening cooperation. Now, in this, right, Africa is not here. If it is about having, while they were doing this, right, they never call Africans leaders to come and be part of this about shared security. Because if the war is in danger, if the war is about how they call it, fighting tolerance, or the war is about China is creating problem to the war, or Russia is creating problem to the war, while Africans leaders, none of African representative was here, right? But let's continue. They said France, faced with the growing alignment of Russia. So you see it, faced with the growing alignment with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Now, these are all nations that the so-called European, the colonizers, see as threat. And this is what Nelson Mandela was talking about. Your enemy cannot beat our enemies, because if your enemies is your enemy might be our friends. So go and make peace with your enemies. Do not make your enemy to be our enemies. Now, NATO is working ever more closely with partners in the Indo-Pacific with the European Union to help reserve peace and protect the rule-based international law. Now, what is that rule-based international law? It should either be the colonizer will. That's the rule-based international. If not the will of the colonizer or the enslaver, they put sanction on you. And that's what we've been seeing time to time on the African continent and to other part of the world, right? That is seen as less or least developed nation. And that's the law right there. If Europe said this, if Europe and America say this, that's why everybody should go back. Whether there's a peace in our region, whether there is no peace, they don't care. They don't care about the life, the safety of those people in our place. As long the rule of the policy of the US and Europe are being protected in our era, that's the international rule, or that's the international law. Now, the Washington Summit Declaration referred to the strategic partnership between Moscow and Belgium as a cause for profound concern. So you see, so every relationship, how they call it, NATO is having is not of concern to the world, right? But the relationship between China and Russia, all right, and then linking Africa and empowering Africa is a concern to the imperialists, is a concern to their hegemony. Now, since the US been on the African continent, Europe been on the African continent, what they have done is have always been chaos. All right, it have always been enslavement, it have always been a colonization, it have always been oppression, it have always been looting, it have always been sanction. Those are the things we get from them. But since Russia and China went there, for example, recent time in Burkina Faso, we have seen how Burkina Faso have succeeded in fighting terrorists with the help of Russian support, giving them arms and ammunition. Okay, but the US, the French, they been in Burkina Faso, they been in Mali. They cannot defeat terrorists. In fact, when they was there was more terrorist attacks. There was more terrorist support. All right. Then since they have left, all right, the Burkinabe have even succeeded to a greater level of defeating terrorists. So how can it be having relationship with these people and then become a war concern? The United States or EU should not be in a position to tell Africans what peace is and what war is. Africans know what is peace, and Africans know what is war, and Africans know their enemies, and Africans know who love them. And this is the time. And now we're just letting African leaders to know these people are ganking up against you. All right, they're having this meeting. You are not there. All right, and they want to defeat China, and that's how you're going to be defeated, because at this point of time, Africa is not in a position to fight Europe, to fight America. All right. So the only way, because America cannot go directly, Europe cannot go directly to fight Africa, they can't do it because they will be faced with NATO, or China, and they will be faced with Russia. So if they can defeat Russia and China, then automatically Africa is defeated. So they said, Allah agreed to establish NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine to coordinate the provision of military equipment and training for Ukraine. They also announced a pledge of long-term security assistance. Then I mean the war in Ukraine is not going to end. It's World War III already. Okay, assistance to Ukraine with a minimum baseline of 40 billion euro within the next year. This pledge will ensure greater burden or shared military support, said Mr. Stoltenberg. It will also provide Ukraine the reliable support it needs to deter and defend against further Russian, how to call it, I'm not going to call it Russia aggression, all right? The war between Russia and Ukraine, because Russia been advocating or calling for peace. It is the United States and EU been saying they don't want peace. Now, they said bringing the total to 20. He also highlighted that allies have agreed to establish a NATO-Ukraine joint analysis, the training and education center, and then let Ukraine come in. So this is what happening here. So these nations, right, they are coming together. Now, when NATO left from here and went to Africa, deliberately got in plane, okay, flew to Africa, went and killed Gaddafi. So was that peace? They went and killed Gaddafi. So what we want to let African know is that when NATO, this is NATO nation, they left from here, got in plane, went in Africa and bombed an African leader and killed an African leader. It was never in alliances with war peace. It was never in alliances with peace agreement between Europe or between the NATO nation in Africa. It was a peace alliances between them because they saw it as danger if Gaddafi sponsored AU, if Gaddafi become a major player of AU and dictating to AU. That's why they kill Gaddafi. Now, we just letting Africans to know about this. Europe and America have never been in a position to see Africa rise. For each time Africa and African want to rise, they see it as a threat and they make sure they go against those leaders. That's why they kill Gaddafi. That's why they kill Patrice Lumumba. That's why they kill Thomas Sankara. All those people saw the good and the betterment for Africa. And even today, they still see Abraham Traore as a threat. They see him as a terrorist. And now assassination attempts have been done directly or indirectly to kill him or to take him out. Now, just last week, all right, there was an American NGO missionary in Chad. Okay, they caught this American NGO and they were there plotting and how they call it, or terrorists. They were supporting terrorists. They were communicating with terrorists. They were training terrorists. All right. And they were caught. This organization was caught, an American NGO. So these are the things that are going on the African continent, and our African leaders are sitting and looking and coming to Europe and America, getting pocket change, while these people are preparing their military, and everything is going to be about Africa. This World War III is actually about Africa. It's not about Ukraine. It's not about Taiwan. It's about Africa. But the point here is they're taking the minds of African, they're drifting the mind of African leaders to be, like it's between China and Russia. Or Ukraine and Russia. It's between Taiwan and China. It's actually about Africa.
No, absolutely. Yo, appreciate you bringing this story. You was going in, brother Frank. A lot of points you were making, and it just conjured a lot of thoughts, man. But just to your point too, last point you made with it being about Africa, when we look at the conflict that's happening between the U.S. and Russia and China, whether it's physical or economic, there is this competition that's taking place. And this competition that's taking place is for the world's resources. And we know that Africa is a place that's coveted by these countries, these superpowers, quote unquote, superpowers. So they're flexing their military might right now against each other. And they finding out who their friends are and who their friends aren't. This isn't a new story. We've seen this. This has happened throughout history. And you mentioned the many African leaders who had lost their lives, whether it's in the diaspora or on the continent. Anyone that wasn't aligned with U.S. or Western expansionism or policy, they were looked at as a threat and an enemy to the empire, to the imperialists. And so we have to be clear on that. That's why we have to look out, identify who those African leaders are around the world who are fighting for African internationalism, Pan-Africanism, the unifying of African people against colonialism, against capitalism, the establishment, because these are people that the state is going to come down on, that the empire will come down on. And the reason I think a lot of our people who are fighting against the state aren't under attack is because our struggles are isolated in a sense. You know what I'm saying? This is why Pan-Africanism, I think, is so much of a threat. Because once we begin to unify across boundaries to fight against our enemy, that's when you're going to see attempted assassinations. I mean, we've already seen those happen in Mali and Burkina Faso, attempted assassinations, right? And this is because, again, if you're not aligned, if you can't be neutral that the United States looks at anybody that claims to be neutral, or whether you're working with their enemies or you're neutral, then you're an enemy. If you're not with us, then you're against us. That is their mindset. But to your point, though, just like even going to the article with NATO, it's interesting because I was recently reading about Trump and his stance with NATO, and he was just like, I didn't know anything about it, when I was president, and I read something, and it only took me, what he said? He said something like 10 seconds to find out what NATO was about, and he Trump is ignorant, but Trump is his whole mentality is that we don't need to be funding NATO. Everybody should be putting in their fair share, but he don't really know how it works. But it's interesting. The reason I bring it up is because like Trump is someone who would probably scrap NATO if he could, But the people who understand the importance of NATO, because you go back into the history, NATO was sort of created as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union, right? And that's why Ukraine, the issue you're having with Ukraine now, because there's this concern of NATO being at their doorstep, which they already are, but NATO being at their doorstep, which is this alliance of what is the North Atlantic Treaty? What is it? NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but this alliance of Western countries going into Eastern Europe, which was initially to counterbalance the Soviet Union, but also like China and anybody that's really going to go against their interests, which is colonial capitalism. So I feel like I'm rambling on about it, but I think this is important. I think you raise an important point, though, because it is about Africa. It is about those resources. And Russia and China wants access to those resources. So this makes NATO even more essential, vital, to Western powers to keep that alliance. And we look at Ukraine. There was a point too about Ukraine that was made. Oh, and China, you brought up China, but China, I was reading how China is supplying Russia with the armaments that's being used in Ukraine, and so there's a problem with that, right? But this shows that the world is organizing, right? The non-Western world is organizing against Western imperialism. And Africa is at the center of that. And so we have to make sure that we're in control of our own destiny and not being influenced by these outside forces. So I know I said a lot, but this was a great story, though. I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I can do mine really quick.
Yeah, we can get into your story quick.
Hey, so we're going to transition to the next story, and then we'll get into the book. But again, appreciate everybody for joining us. I know it's been a few weeks since we've done a book club, so we're starting a new book. I'll put the link to this book too in the chat. And I appreciate everybody like, subscribe, share. Let's get as many people as possible to be a part of this. Subscribe to the channel and encourage others to do the same. So I'm just going to quickly go into the story. The Philadelphia Reparations Task Force was formed, and let me pull this up. Yeah, so this will just be more of an informative thing than really getting too deep into the story, but New Philadelphia Task Force studies reparations for Black residents. And of course, there's a lot of opinions on Reparation Task Force, a lot of criticisms, a lot of support. But there is a divide in all communities, whether it's the white community or the Black community. There is a divide on reparations in general and the creation of a task force. A new city task force is investigating whether and how Philadelphia should provide reparations to Black residents, descendants from enslaved ancestors, such as direct payments, targeted social services, and political and economic reforms. So I won't read the whole story. Was I sharing that? I'm not sure if I was sharing. Was I sharing that?
Yeah, it was shared.
Oh, okay. So my thoughts, and I'm helping with the research. Peace, brother Richard, who's heading up, chairing the committee, one of the committees on the task force. Hey, welcome, brother. And that's a coincidence. He didn't even know I was going to be talking about this. So I'm, helping also with the research on the Atlantic world, and so the slave trade and the history of slavery and oppression, exploitation in Philadelphia. But I think it's important. Like for me, when it comes to the reparations, I feel as though if Africans do not receive reparations, then we should not be moving forward as some sort of like a unified group, as if everything is fine and we're all a part of this system and we're all Americans, right? I think in order to prove that that you really want to make amends and sort of restore the harm, or make some sort of repair to the harm that has been made to African people in America. Because we're talking about Philadelphia, so I'm centering Philadelphia in America right now. But if you really want to make amends for the harm that has been done, then I think reparations is the only answer to that. Otherwise, Black people need to be thinking about, okay, how do we form? And even when we get reparations, even with reparations, we should be thinking about how to form a sovereign community, a sovereign society, right? Not to say that others can't be a part of that society, but we need to be the leaders of this community, of this society. Right now, we're a part of a European design and creation. And so I think reparations could help towards the building of that. We need to have that mindset. But I think this also symbolizes the attitude of the colonizer when it comes to the repairing of the harm that has been committed against African people. This shouldn't even be a debate. It shouldn't even be a conversation. Recently, the survivors of the Tulsa massacre was denied reparations, right? And this is something that happened in 1921. So it just shows, our enemy's true colors, I feel. But it's not to say that we don't struggle though too, because whether it's symbolism or we can get it, I think it does heighten the contradiction between African and European people when it comes to our history and our relationship. The last thing, I just wanted to share this clip of this lady in California, because they have formed a task force. It's 53 seconds, and this is her thoughts on reparations.
I'm concerned about the proposal to help facilitate the distribution of reparations. Economists, consultants from the task force reported the total amount could be as much as $800 billion. $800 billion. That's 2.5 times the size of our entire state budget. To pay for that, you'd need a major tax hike, unlike anything this state has ever seen before. I recognize and acknowledge the painful part of our history. The pains of our past should not be paid by the people of today. The majority of our state is Latino and Asian, making up 55% of our population. Most of them, like me, are first, second, or third generation immigrants who had nothing to do with slavery, discrimination, Jim Crow laws, nothing. It is fundamentally unfair to force these people to pay for this, and because of that, I will be opposing today.
All right. So, like I said, there's an argument out there against it, but I want to just, don't have a lot of time. At this point, when it comes to America as a system, as a state, they owe their existence, they owe their wealth, right? They owe their power to the enslavement, the exploitation of African people, and the theft and the genocide of indigenous people, the indigenous people of America, and the taking of their land, right? The fact that people are able to benefit in any way in America is because of the great wealth that America has, right? And why do they have that wealth? Why are they such a powerful state? It's because of the slavery and the colonialism. It's because of slavery and colonialism. It's because of the production of African people. We created all of this wealth and power. Not to say that others didn't have, but we play a very essential, vital part to the creation of the United States of America. And even before the United States of America, when it was a colony, we need to go back to even that period of time, because there was a time where Britain, even though America as a colony was a part of the British Empire, they were almost self-governing, right? They had assemblies. There was a thing called salutary neglect, where the British sort of took a hands-off approach. So even during colonialism, these English colonies, the leaders of these colonies were calling the shots, and they were making the decisions when it came to slavery, whether slavery existed or not. And that's why it continued to exist when it became the United States of America. So even the British and America, when it comes to even the colonial period, are both complicit and should be held accountable for that. So there's a lot to be said, man, and I know. So I'm gonna just give it to you, Frank, and maybe we'll circle back around to the story another time.
Yeah, again, I spoke about this right last week with this kind of an attitude to say, our forefather did it to you, we didn't do it to you. I spoke about this last week, and I'm not going to go deeper into it. But that lady, she stood up in there, right, and she spoke ignorantly, right? I think that she's so passionate, she knows what she's talking about, right? But what she failed to realize is there is something called generational wealth. All right.
Absolutely.
And this is what I'm talking about, that generational wealth. Okay. The position she has today, right, it was created because the wealth of the where you are inheriting today or you are enjoying, it came from exploiting African people. It came from enslaving African people. Now, if only, okay, you were never going to, your forefather were never going to exploit and to colonize the African continent and to enslave the African people. The time those people served to work on a cotton plantation, all right, on a sugarcane plantation, the time they took to serve your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, they could have taken that time to serve for themselves, to create wealth for their generation. And then the condition their generation, their descendants are in today, they would not have been in it. They would have been in better position because the position they created for your forefather that you are living today, they could have created that position for themselves and for their children. And their children could have been in better place today. And not only that, the laws that you are holding onto today, those colonial laws, those Jim Crow laws that you are holding on today, it was created by your forefather. Now, you say you did not enslave them, you did not cause the situation, your forefather caused it, right? Fine, good, bravo. Your forefather created the Jim Crow law that you are holding on to today, okay? To carry on to maintain that colonial wealth that you don't want to share, to maintain that colonial status that you do not want to share. It was created by them. Slave law, those were law created, and you still maintain those clauses in the Constitution of the United States. Those things were never created by you. It was created by your forefather, and you continue to maintain those laws. Then how can you say our forefather did it, so we are not going to pay for what our forefather did? But you are holding onto what your forefather did. You are holding onto it. You are holding onto the wealth. You are holding onto the colonial policies. Okay, Jim Crow policy. You are still holding onto it, and not only that. Now, Haiti, when the Haitians were gaining independence, in fact, not only independent, let's go by this. When they were fighting for freedom, okay, from the white man, from your forefather, you said you as property. If you want to gain your freedom, you have to pay us. That was reparation, because they were trying to repair your feelings. They were trying to repair the loss, the damages that you are going to get when they are free, because you will no longer see them as property. No, they will no longer work for you on a sugar plantation or on a sugarcane plantation. So the reparation that they gave you, you use that money and then pay people to go on a plantation to continue, okay, providing work for you. To the extent today, the equivalent to what Haiti gave to your forefather that you are enjoying today, okay, it was equivalent to $23 billion. And they paid this money up to 2014. I mean, this is recent. Then how can you say, no, this was created by your forefather, that is seeing enslaved Africans were paying from the days of your forefather to your days, this current time, 21st century, 2014, they were still paying. Then how can you say your forefather did it? You did not do it, and you can't pay for it. They fought for their freedom and they paid for their freedom. There was no complaint, and you continue to accept it. All right. Not only that, even in America here, in America, okay, when they were abolishing slavery, they did not end slavery, they abolished it, but they did not give freedom to the man that was enslaved here. It's there in your constitution. It's there. Have you gone to take it out? It's there, and you maintain it. All right. Now, during that time, your father, your mother, they gave them reparation just because African in America here were fighting for their freedom. They gave them reparation. They repelled. And that money, your mother took it, your father took it and put it into business. All right. Now, after they took it, they put it into business. And what was the business they put it in? They put it back into the prison system. And then your father and your mother went back and sat down again, because last time they control Congress. They sat down and said, okay, we have the people have given you money and we want to free them, right? But we are not going to free them. We're going to come out with a prison system. Then your father and your mother went and created a prison system and said, okay, even though you are free, but you will still go back to the plantation once you are, how to call it, you are committed a crime, and you go to the court and the court put you in jail. So your father created that means again to subjugate the same people who are asking for reparation. And today, your father created a prison system for you, and you are enjoying it. These are the things we're talking about. You are still holding on to colonial policy, and you sit in there as a lawmaker. You don't even understand what is going on, and you think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you absolutely. You got me fired up, man. There's some other things I want to say, but I know we got to move on. We're gonna have to start doing these podcasts a little longer. We've been saying that for a while, but we're gonna get into this book. But we'll come back to this topic as well, because this is an ongoing thing. But I want to at least transition. I put the link to the book in the chat, and so we'll just take the next 20 minutes and look at the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Boom. All right. So we'll at least take this time to look at the introduction, and we'll probably be covering this for the next month or so, going into Black August. And so look out too for some things that we'll be doing for Black August. So this is a Pan-African perspective, Nigeria and the struggle for liberation in South Africa. And we're looking at is this clear on the screen? Let me see. No, it's not. Still loading. Hold on.
It's not clear. But I mean, if you can see it from your side, we can go ahead, because
Okay.
Okay, yeah, it's clear.
All right. So introduction. So for too long in our history, Africa has spoken through the voices of others. Now what I have called an African personality in international affairs will have a chance of making its proper impact, and will let the world know it through the voices of Africa's own sons. And that was Kwame Nkrumah who made this statement, which I think is spot on. You know, African personality, I think, is very important when we think about Pan-Africanism. That is what Pan-Africanism is creating, right? This African personality, a sort of a collective personality that is needed to move against colonial capitalism. You know, we need to have the individual personalities that we have when we're talking about a collective African personality, because in order to collectively achieve something, you know, we have to be able to see our objectives, goals, and strategies in the same way, right? And if without an African personality, it would be very difficult to do that. Now, I know there's going to be various other like levels, or I should say, what is different levels of or states of consciousness that we're going to have, and there's going to be various personalities too as well. I think, you know, you have sort of this quote unquote sub personalities, but I think like I believe that the overarching super personality that we need to have is this African personality, whether on the continent or in the diaspora. So I definitely unite with Nkrumah on that. And actually, you know, if I could, because I was looking at Dr. Amerson Wilson, I need to cover this chapter as well. But just really quick, something that Dr. Amerson Wilson has said on power and personality, and this is from the Blueprint for Black Power. He says, perhaps this is not as remarkable as it seems at first when we recognize, and what he's referring to, which I didn't read, he's referring to, you know, the importance of a social personality as opposed to this individual or rugged individualism, or personality influenced by rugged individualism, where there's just this emphasis on the individual personality. But he says, perhaps this is not as remarkable as it seems at first when we recognize the fact that an effectively functional group must maintain some necessary measure of conformity and unanimity if it is to achieve its goal in a planned and coordinated manner. And just one more thing he says the social system in which the personality is bred, matured, and embedded is characterized by an immense inequality of power relationships, especially in its early phases, and a relatively systematic and organized sanctions, that is, rewards, punishments, incentives, is imposed on the individual. That is imposed on the individual. Let me read that again. Organized sanctions it imposes on the individual eventually leads to the learning of a complementary pattern of responses by the individual, which is also organized and generalized. In sum, the predominant social system and those who define and control it substantially help to shape the organized personalities of its individual members. This means that much of its contents, abilities, tendencies, interests, and tastes, which uniquely characterizes members, are derived from it and are integrated into their unique personalities. To sort of summarize what he's saying, our personalities are the African personality as individuals under the system of colonial capitalism has been influenced by the European. This is something that we all are very, you know, conscious of. I don't need to go deep into that, but that's what he's getting to. And so when we're talking about this African personality, it is to combat the personality that has been developed under colonialism, which is used to help build colonialism, help build Western civilization. So let me go into this real quick. I will read a couple paragraphs if you want to add on, but let me at least read something though. Economic globalization began with the circumnavigation of the Cape of Good Hope by Vasco da Gama toward the end of the 15th century, 1487, 1497. That circumnavigation opened the prospect of trade and economic relations among the three continents of the ancient world, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Shortly after that time, the Americas were added as sources of raw materials, precious metals, and subsequently cash crops. South Africa became, in time, a magnet for demographic globalization. People from other continents found their way to Africa, either willingly or by force, in search of new opportunities. Thus, economic globalization was the emergence of a global network of interlocking factors of production and the growth of economic interdependence across the globe. Africa is of growing international importance. By the end of the first decade of this 21st century, for instance, Africa south of the Sahara is likely to become an important source of United States energy imports as the Middle East. China, India, Europe, and others are competing with each other and with the United States for access to oil, natural gas, and other natural resources from Africa. This is reminding me of your story, Frank. The world's major powers are also becoming more active in seeking investments, winning contracts, and building political support in the continent. Africa is also one of the battlegrounds in the fight against terrorism. Osama bin Laden based his operations in Sudan before setting up a base in Afghanistan. Terrorists struck United States embassies in Africa years before the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States. Radicals and fundamentalist African Muslims are actively recruited for terrorist operations in Afghanistan and the Middle East, including Iraq. Mass killings in the Darfur region of Sudan, which is happening now. This was written before the recent activities. War in the Great Lakes region and the persistence of conflict in the continent challenges the world's will to spotlight, prevent, and stop atrocities. Africa is also the epicenter of the world's most serious health epidemic, HIV and AIDS. And really quick, just again, going back to your story, you made so many points when you were doing your weekly roundup. You had said something too, as far as the amount of attacks, terrorist attacks, and just the violence and conflict, how there was more under the Western watch than there is, not under their watch, right? Or under, I don't know if maybe we can call it supervision, really. Let's be honest about it. But, and it made me think, like, even in our communities, in the state and the Black communities, the more police you have, it seems like the more crime that is being committed in our communities. And what's up with that contradiction? It's because they're not really there to stop the chaos, right? They're there to protect their interests. France has an interest, America has an interest. So when they're in these places, the more chaos that is happening, guess what? You need them. At least psychologically, you think, oh, we need them to protect us and defend us. Look at all of these attacks. Look at the conflict, so you're begging for them to come in with more police, more military. So I know I said a lot, but Frank, I'm gonna pass it to you, man. Did you have any thoughts? All right. Oh, you good? You want me to keep going?
I mean, the internet is so I don't even know why today.
Oh, what happened?
All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
The internet is gonna suck. It's gonna.
All right.
Yeah,
I was saying if you had any I don't know if you heard me or not.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just to you said a lot, right? But again, like you were saying, like what Nkrumah said about perspective, right? That African perspective going to be different from the European perspective. And in a simple way, right? I'm going to put this. There is something called the African War and the European War, right? Now, with the African War, right, we are fighting for one thing. If you look at the entire globe, everywhere Black people are, there is one thing in common that they are fighting for. It's liberation. If you go to Australia, the Aboriginal, the right people of Australia, the Black people, they are fighting for one thing, freedom. And who are they fighting against? The European. You come to America, the same thing, liberation. Who? The European. You go to Europe, the same thing, liberation. Who are they fighting against? The European. The African continent, the same thing. We are fighting for liberation. Who are we fighting against? The European. Now, the Europeans are not fighting for liberation. In America, they are not fighting for liberation. Australia, Europeans are not fighting for liberation. England, they are not fighting for liberation. Okay? What they are fighting for, America, Europe, Australia, right? What they are fighting for is what? Oppression. They are fighting to maintain oppression. They are fighting to maintain captivity. That's what they are fighting for. So that is why, right? When Africans are fighting for liberation, who are we fighting against? European. Why are we fighting against them? Because of their oppressive behavior against Africans. Check the entire globe, the entire world. Everywhere people are fighting for liberation, everywhere people are fighting for peace, they are fighting for peace against the European. They are not fighting for peace. Go to the Middle East. Who is the Middle East fighting for a peace against? The European. They, when they carry war, they carry terrorist activities there. The same way on the African continent. We're fighting for peace. Who are we fighting against? Peace. We are not fighting Africans. We are fighting European, okay, for peace and liberation all over in the world. So we have nothing in common when it comes with them. But Africans, no matter where you are, we are fighting for liberation and peace, and everything that is being fought is against these people. Now, I'm saying this to say that if it is different, how can America come to Africa or to any African nation or to any black nation and then speak about peace when they are not fighting for peace? How can they come there and talk about liberation when they are not fighting for liberation? Because we are fighting for liberation is against them. So that is why we can never, ever come to Europe or to America as Africans, as black people, right, with our situation, and you think the European going to listen to our situation because our situation are being caused by them. That is why anytime Africans, we go to the United Nations with our situation, the United Nations never listen to it because they control the United Nations. And the reason to which, we are taking our problem to the United Nations is because of them. It's because they are causing it. So that's why, like Nkrumah was saying, okay, in this article, right, the African perspective would be different from the European perspective. Why? Because we are not fighting the same cause.
Now, thanks for that add-on. I wanted to go back quickly to, I know we don't have a lot of time, but just going back to this first paragraph, I wanted to point out something. The author is talking about economic globalization, beginning with Vasco da Gama. I'm feeling like I'm back in my public school, elementary school, being indoctrinated, man. Man, they ain't begin with no damn Vasco da Gama. I just want to point that out. Like there was global trade, at least between the three continents, because he makes this point in the next sentence. The connection between Africa, Asia, and Europe, because when we're talking about globalization, even though it's not the whole globe, in this context, this was sort of like the globalization of that time, the predecessor to world globalization. But I mean, you had the Silk Road that existed for centuries before Vasco da Gama. So there was this trade that is going to become more widespread, and there's going to be more routes created, right? Because of the circumnavigation. But these three continents were definitely connected. I mean, a prime example of it is that's how the bubonic plague was able to spread to the three continents, because Africa was impacted, at least North Africa was impacted as well, but not as much as Europe and Asia. But anyway, I wanted to make that point. And another point too, he states that after the time the Americas were added as a source of raw material. Shortly after that time, talking about Vasco da Gama's circumnavigation, the Americas were added as a source of raw materials, precious metals, and subsequently cash crops, which was a result of Portuguese and Spanish colonization of the Americas. But I think like when we look at history, at least for me, when we're looking at this design that we're a part of today, like the design was being created at this time, and the motivations for the creation of this design of colonial capitalism, right? That motivation, those incentives that was created, and there was ideas that was created around it. Those is what influence the people that are in power today, and those who try to align themselves and be a part of this system as well. And so I'm saying, like, America being added as a source of raw material, precious metals, and subsequently cash crops. When we're talking about colonial European expansion, this motivation means whoever's there, we don't care who's there in America, right? We need to exploit those lands. And we don't care who's in Africa. We need to exploit those lands, right, by any means necessary for their precious metals and the production of these cash crops. So I don't think, for me, much hasn't changed. It's still, when we're talking about colonial capitalism, it is about the exploitation of the land and the resources, right? This is what the European is all about. And this is why, even going back to the discussion we were having on reparations, this is why it's like so far fetched, because the designers of this system, they understand how reparations, which can empower Black people, may cripple the colonial capitalist system, right? That could cripple if it's done correctly, if it's done right. Because I was reading an article about California, and they're taking part of the budget, the California budget, which is in the billions, and I think they're taking 12 million to use for reparations. Think about that, 12 million. I'm gonna leave that conversation for another day. I wanted to see if you had any last thoughts, Fred.
I mean, even adding to that, right? And just from that ignorant, I know whether she's a representative or senator, government official that spoke, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in this 21st century, 1985, I think she was alive at that time, 1985, the Moon's bombing, Philadelphia. That's another reparation that they need to pay.
Yeah,
it's recent. It was
absolutely.
never bombed by their forefather. Philadelphia, right here, 1985 Moon's bombing. You went and bought in plane and bomb Black neighborhood and bomb Black economy. Okay, things that should have empowered them, and you bomb them, destroy it to disempower them. And then you want to say your forefather did it when recently you did it, 1985. It's recent. You did that. Now, even 1941, even Tulsa, Oklahoma, if we want to really talk about it, it's recent. It's recent. 1921. It's not that far. All right. Yeah. And the truth is, a lot of times slavery was abolished, in quote, abolished, 1865. So if slavery was abolished 1865, then how can you bomb? So Black people from 1865 to 1921, they grew their economy, and they decided to build their own, how they call it, community. And then boom, you came out after 1865 from right to 1921. They grew themselves, regrew themselves, build their economy, build their Wall Street, and you came and destroy it. And then you say you can't pay for it. Come on, man. These people, some of them, they speak that they are not human beings.
Yo, that's devilish work right there, man. That's when I'm not even, because that'll be another 5-10 minutes, man. Yo, I want to appreciate everybody for tapping in. We do need to do these longer, but schedules be crazy, but we need to figure something out, because I feel like when we get to the book, we just getting started. But anyway, whatever information we can get out in this time, though, hopefully it's informative and it's empowering, and let's build on it. Let's continue to build on it, and let's come up with. We see the problem. Let's come up with the solutions, right? And so appreciate you all. Make sure, again, if this is your first time with us, subscribe. Make sure you like and share. People can always come back and look at this, look at the recording. So we'll be back next Saturday to continue with this book. But you do have access to it. So if you want to read ahead, you can, and join us for a fruitful discussion next time. So until then, Uhuru, Black Power, African Power, free the land. Maybe I should do, I haven't done this in a long time. Here we go.